I got to ask you this because you did serve in Afghanistan and you're into creepy stories. Did you hear about the Kandahar giant?
Oh yeah, I covered it. I
haven't seen
myself.
that episode.
So
did you hear about it when you were over there?
So I did. I talked to one of our interpreters when I was over there because I had heard of it. Because I told you in my own personal time, I find myself researching and learning about all sorts of crazy stuff like Dark Five, and so the Kandahar giant it's a fascinating story, and it's one that people can poo-poo it all they want, but there's enough circumstantial evidence and testimony that suggests something could have happened. So there's this guy, I think he was a Green Beret, and he goes by like W on the internet. He's like sort of anonymized himself, but he came forward with this story where he described he and his battalion had been tasked to go find these missing, I think, Army Rangers. You got to give me some grace in the details. I haven't told this in a minute. But there were these Army Rangers that had gone missing up in the mountains in Kandahar. And so this guy, W, who years later is telling the story to, I think, a reporter or something, he and his platoon, they head off into the mountains to go find these guys. And if you're not familiar with the landscape of Afghanistan, it's like a desert but a mountain everywhere. It's like it looks like the surface of Mars or something. You're looking out and it's both stunningly beautiful in that there's snow-capped mountains off in the distance, and but it's also it's jagged, it's sharp, it looks like just a rugged place to be.
Afghanistan is a highly rugged, landlocked country dominated by the massive Hindu Kush mountain range, which covers roughly 75% of the land and splits the nation into distinct geographic regions. This terrain features extreme elevations, peaking at Noshak at 7,492 meters, 24,580 feet, and averages roughly 1,800 meters, 5,900 feet, across the country. The landscape is characterized by soaring snow-capped peaks, deep, isolated river valleys, and vital high-altitude mountain passes like the Salang and Khyber passes. These geographic barriers historically acted as natural fortresses, isolating communities and complicating infrastructure development, while the melting mountain snow remains the primary water source for agriculture in the fertile lowlands.
And they're hiking through the mountains, and eventually they come across, and there's nothing. There's no structures, nothing. They're hiking along this trail up on the side of the mountain, and they see what looks like metal. I think it's like a military grade metal, like a piece of a radio or something. And so this guy W and his crew, they find what appears to be remains of like literally a radio. It's a government issued radio, and there's a goat trail that heads up this mountain. And so they follow the goat trail, and as they're going, they're finding more and more little bits of an antenna. There's a piece of somebody's backpack that's got it's a camo backpack. So there's remnants of somebody being out here, military. We don't know who it is. They can't hear anything. They're calling out. They have no comms with anybody in the area. They go up this little goat trail, and they get to this plateau, and they see, as I recall it, just like equipment everywhere, and there's like bones, there's like military equipment, like pieces all over this plateau, and there's this fucking cave entrance that's like ominously sitting in front of this semi-flat plateau at the top of this mountain. And immediately, W and his crew, they're like, oh my God, like they must have been ambushed right here. This is the remains of whoever was killed, of this missing battalion. And so they end up walking into this cave to see if there's any survivors or combatants or whatever. And I guess a couple of guys went in, and they reported it being so dark they couldn't see anything, and there was a steep drop off, so they backed out of the cave. And then at some point, a fucking spear, like a javelin, comes soaring out of the cave entrance and fucking impales this dude Mike on the recovery team, kills him, and this huge giant, they would describe him, comes running out of the cave, big red beard, he's got like tribal regalia on, and he's like fisticuffing with the army, backup crew here. They all shoot and they kill him, and the thing falls down. It's got like six fingers on each hand, 6 toes, but it's dead. And everyone's like, what the fuck is going on? Like, Mike's been killed by a spear. There's this huge giant laying here. Nobody knew what it was. They thought it was a person, but they didn't know. A helicopter came in and they put him in a net, the body, and they flew it off. And then the survivors, they were taken off, and like there was no one was like W and his crew were not given any sort of like, hey, yeah, this turned out this was the missing battalion, and oh, don't worry, this is a giant. Like there was no debrief. They just like they left. But then through the grapevine, W reported hearing that apparently this fucking giant body was brought to an air base, and some of the pilots that had flown the helicopter had seen it, and they had been talking about it having 6 fingers, 6 toes, and they signed not NDAs, they did the equivalent in the military of you're not going to talk about this, and then it was sort of ushered away. But there was all these people on that base that effectively came out and said, we saw what appeared to be a giant with 6 fingers, 6 toes. This guy Mike, apparently, according to W's story, was killed. I mean, there's a guy who's been killed by this thing by a spear, apparently. And
is there a record of his death?
This is all, you have to keep in mind, this is all almost entirely from W's account. There's long been a history of people claiming there are giants in the mountains of Kandahar. I talked to the interpreters that I was working with in Afghanistan, and they had said that they had heard rumors of there being giants that live in the caves, especially in Kandahar. So there's already sort of lore around this, but this guy W comes out and has this narrative where he apparently tells this reporter, and he remained anonymous. So in terms of confirming details, it's sparse to say the least.
The sketchiest part about it is something that big needs a lot of calories. And so they have to eat a lot of animals. And it doesn't seem like that's a very heavily populated area when it comes to animals. Like you would need the amount of food that it would need. Like if you have a 12-foot tall human being or whatever it is, and it weighs 2,000 pounds, you know how much fucking meat you need in a day?
Yeah, that's a good, just logically speaking, what does it eat?
Right. You would have to like constantly be eating meat. And you'd have to stay alive without getting spotted. So you have to go out there and hunt meat?
Yeah, and how no one really knows you exist.
You're hunting with a javelin?
The way I see it is, having been to Afghanistan, certainly not encountering any giants, you see parts of Afghanistan that really do look like you're on another planet. I mean, it's really these crazy just mountains everywhere, and you see these cave systems, where typically combatants would hide out in.
There's absolutely no credible scientific, archaeological, or historical evidence to support the legend of the Kandahar giant. The story originated on online forums and paranormal radio shows, claiming that U.S. Special Forces killed a 12 to 15-foot tall, red-haired humanoid in a cave in 2002. However, the U.S. Department of Defense has flatly stated they have no record of any such incident. No physical remains or bones have ever been produced, and any photos or videos circulating on social media have been debunked as digital manipulations or AI-generated hoaxes. Mainstream investigators, military historians, and fact-checking organizations like Snopes classify the account entirely as a modern urban legend. Thank you for watching.
The mountain was silent, the air thin, and the mission routine, until a heavy thud echoed from the dark mouth of the cave, and a 12-foot spear tore through the dark. What crawled out of that Afghanistan ridge wasn't human, and the silence that followed from the highest levels of the military wasn't a coincidence. It was a cover-up. If a creature that large, carrying 6 fingers and ancient tribal rage, could vanish from official records without a trace, it leaves you wondering, what else are they keeping locked away in the most unreachable corners of the earth? And what is still waiting in the dark? Coming from Joe Rogan's podcast, episode 2530, this is a chilling account of a 12-foot giant that slaughtered an entire U.S. Special Forces team deep in an Afghan cave. What exactly is this monster? Let's find out.
The story of the Kandahar giant.
Yeah, let's tell the story.
This story has grown into a mythology over the years. Years ago, I was working with a gentleman named Steve Quayle, and we started a production company called Gen 6 Productions. And we were making documentary films mainly about giants, mainly on the topic of giants.
Giants as like referred to in the Bible, in ancient history, the Smithsonian giants.
That's right, biblical and historical accounts of giants. So I was traveling around the world investigating giants, and Steve is known for his investigations into giants. And he got a phone call from an elderly woman who told him, "You need to talk to my son. My son has a story he needs to tell you." And she had to convince her son to talk to Steve, and ultimately he did. And he was active duty. He was a C-130 pilot, active duty. He actually went on coast to coast with Steve. They went on coast to coast together, and he related his story, I believe, with George Norrie, him, Steve, and George. And then later on, we flew him into Bozeman, Montana to put him in our documentary film that we were making. And he wanted to be filmed in silhouette. He did not want his face out there, even though he knew that they're going to be able to mark him just by his voice. So he flies into Bozeman. We meet with him. He shows us his credentials. He was active duty C-130. And then he told us the following story, among many other things that he told us. He said back in 2005, he was deployed in Afghanistan and Iraq running missions as a C-130 cargo pilot. And oftentimes they would have him fly into Bagram Airfield. And these were routine missions. And so on one of these missions, he's flying into Bagram. But this time when he landed, he was met, as soon as he deplaned, he was met on the tarmac by some individuals that he describes as the babysitters. He calls them the babysitters. He thinks they were either Army intelligence or Air Force intelligence guys. They didn't tell him. But this was different because when he disembarked, they told him, no photos, no mention of this ever, this never happened. So he knew that whatever was about to happen was top secret. And he had flown classified missions before, usually retrieving Taliban guys, what he described as high-valued assets. But this was different because there were intelligence guys on the tarmac waiting for something. And it turns out what they were waiting for was the cargo that was being delivered on a forklift to the C-130. And the pilot says that the first thing that struck him as this cargo was moving toward him and his crew was the odor. He said it smelled like musk, BO, and death. And it was extremely pungent. And when the cargo arrived, it was on an air cargo pallet, which is 7 by 9. And he could see that there was a person on the pallet in the fetal position. And this individual was so large that his hands and his feet and part of his head were hanging off the pallet. And he and his loadmaster, and there were some Marines who accompanied the pallet, who accompanied this cargo. They were actually putting their feet up to this guy's feet, this dead giant's feet, and seeing how small their feet were compared to his. Now, the giant had red hair. He had 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot. His feet were wrapped in like a crude canvas foot wrapping. And he was solid as a rock. Again, most of his body was covered by a tarp, but the pilot and the guys around him were hitting him with their fists. And he came up to about their midsection, laying in the fetal position. And the pilot told me he was solid as a rock, this guy. And he asked the Marines, what happened? Where did this guy come from? And they told him that they had heard that there was a team that was out in Afghanistan that was looking for Taliban or something. And they came upon a cave because there was a nearby village, and the villagers were bringing food and other artifacts to the mouth of this cave. And so they thought that they're aiding and abetting the Taliban. So they went into the cave, and rather than encountering the Taliban, what they found was this enormous humanoid who killed them all. And then, according to these soldiers, they deployed another team to go look for that team. And when they found the cave, they found the traces of that other team. They were ready. They were prepared. And they were able to kill the giant. In fact, the soldiers told the pilot that the giant was eating on members of the team who had killed previously. But these new guys, they took him down, and then they had a transport helicopter come in and airlift him to Bagram.
Did you ever try to find records of who was there and casualties that were reported, deaths that were reported?
It's very difficult. The Pentagon actually released a statement some years ago, which is bizarre to me. You know, basically saying, in paraphrasing, the Kandahar giant incident never happened. There was never a giant that was killed in Afghanistan.
The
and so
Pentagon.
forth. Yeah, it was a representative. It was like a spokesman from the Pentagon or something, or a release from the Pentagon.
Is this available online?
Yeah, they actually felt the need to debunk this.
That's hilarious.
Now,
that gets me sketchy.
well, I believed the pilot because he was a very credible guy. He didn't want his name out there. He didn't want fame or notoriety. He was very nervous. He thought there's a good chance that they're going to recognize me by my voice. He was on Coast to Coast AM, and then he's on in our documentary. There's a good chance I'm going to get recognized, and there's going to be some reprisal. He was nervous. Now, they weighed the giant before they loaded him on the C-130, because they have to load everything that goes onto the C-130. The loadmaster weighed him. He weighed 1,100 pounds, and they estimated his height at 10 to 12 feet tall. And so they loaded him onto the C-130, and then they flew him to Qatar. And then they unloaded the cargo in Qatar. And our pilot told me he heard through the grapevine that the body ended up at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He said, I don't know. That's just what I heard. So this is a firsthand account from the C-130 pilot who flew the body himself from Bagram Airfield to Qatar.
Why does all the weird shit go to Wright-Patterson?
That's a good question.
Because that's where the weird shit goes.
Right.
Here's the thing. Stories like the Kandahar giant spark huge curiosity. But curiosity without critical thinking leaves you open to pure manipulation. If you want to separate genuine military mysteries from fabricated internet folklore, you need a quick mental framework to test any bold claim before accepting it as truth. Here is your 3-step filter for analyzing viral conspiracy stories. First, trace the first-hand chain of evidence. Notice how this narrative relies heavily on hearsay. Ask yourself, is there a primary physical record, like a flight log, a verified service record, or unedited footage? Or is it entirely a friend of a friend account? Anonymous testimony from a C-130 pilot makes for great storytelling, but without verifiable metadata, it remains an unfalsifiable myth. Second, spot the mythological tropes. Notice the specific details in the report. Red hair, 6 fingers, 6 toes, and ancient cave dwellers. These are direct copies of pre-existing giant legends, from biblical Nephilim myths to North American folklore, like the Lovelock Cave Giants. When a modern military story perfectly matches ancient mythology, you are likely looking at modern folklore adapting old tropes rather than breaking news. Third, evaluate the institutional response. The Pentagon debunking this story doesn't automatically mean a cover-up. Major institutions frequently address viral hoaxes simply to curb public panic or stop endless media inquiries. Official denials aren't always proof of hidden truth. Often they are just reactions to internet virality. The real takeaway isn't whether giants exist, it's how easily well-constructed stories hijack human imagination. Train your brain to enjoy the mystery without surrendering your logic. What's the wild mystery you've heard that actually turned out to be true? Drop it in the comments below, subscribe for more deep dives into the space where myth meets reality, and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next analysis. Coming from Joe Rogan's podcast, 2510, The Chilling Secrets Hidden by the Military About a Giant Warlord in Afghanistan. Let's watch.
About this, and this is a silly thing to ask you, because you said Kandahar.
Yeah.
Have you heard of the legend of
Yes,
the Kandahar giant?
Of course.
Yeah. What did you hear? When did you hear?
Well, I've seen. Okay. There's some freaks out there, man. There's some freaks. So yeah, I mean, I've seen the YouTube video. I've heard about it from other people, but legit. Okay. Hard for me because I was far away. Okay, I was probably about 200 meters away.
If you don't know about the legend of Kandahar, let me explain. The legend of Kandahar is a popular modern urban legend claiming that in 2002, a squad of U.S. soldiers went missing in a remote mountain region of Kandahar, Afghanistan, prompting a military rescue team to track them to a massive cave. According to the myth, which first gained traction online via alternative media outlets and paranormal investigators, the soldiers were ambushed by a hidden 13-foot-tall, red-headed humanoid giant with 6 fingers on each hand who impaled a soldier with a spear before the rest of the squad killed it with sustained rifle fire. The story concludes with the military allegedly airlifting the giant's corpse away on a helicopter to a top-secret facility for study, enforcing strict non-disclosure agreements on the witnesses.
We were doing a mobility exercise. Okay, mobility, I hate mobility. Okay, mobility was my least favorite op. Mobility, basically, you get in a bunch of trucks and you kind of roll out and you kind of look for a fight. Okay, so we were doing like a 2-week mobility in this region, kind of north of the Panjway. I don't remember exactly what it was called. It was this, surrounded by mountains, this big valley, and we were rolling around. And so there was a village that we were going to check out, and I'm like a gunner, okay? So I don't know everything that's going on. I'm a dude on a machine gun, okay? But I can see everything that's happening. I kind of know what we're doing, but I know that there's a meeting, and what they have is they have these warlords. It's not the same kind of political system or anything that we have in like North America. Kind of the baddest dude in the region becomes in charge, okay? So we were meeting with one of the local warlords. And so the town was like 500 meters away. They drove out from the town about 500 meters, and we had our trucks about 200 meters from the meeting point. Our officer and a couple dudes went forward, and we're looking. This guy, I mean, he was maybe twice as big. He was huge. He was a massive dude.
Like how big?
I think he was 8 feet. I think he was 8 foot something. And it's embarrassing. It's like, Devin, you're crazy. And he's big.
How? And he was 200 meters away.
He's about 200 meters away, but I can see the guys. We got optics. Our officer was probably somewhere between at the bottom of his chest. Great big Afghan dude. Big beard, big dude. And his lackeys around him were normal size. Great big warlord. So they're out there. There's big people. There's big,
8 feet is nuts.
I have personally seen people who were probably over 8 feet.
What?
Yeah.
In Afghanistan?
No. I saw these guys up northern Canada. Cree. I was up in Ojibugamo, okay, this Cree village. I remember walking up. I'm there for arm wrestling. We're having an arm wrestling tournament, and I'm looking up. We're walking up the stairs in this hockey arena, and this dude, I'm like, that's a really big dude. And by the time I got there, I was about, and I'm like 6'5", I was about at his nipple. Okay?
What?
Yeah, big hands. Big, long hands. Like out of the Goonies, like misshapen face. I'm like, my God. I'm like, how big are you? He's like, just laughed at me. And he's like, he's like, my dad's 8'11". He's like,
what?
Yeah, big.
My dad's 8'11".
I'm telling you, there's big people. And people don't know about them. Guinness doesn't know about them. They live up in the woods. There's big people out there. And not all of them.
What is that guy, Jamie?
He's from that region, apparently. I don't know how to say that. Edouard Beaupre.
So there's just giants that live in that region?
Yeah.
8'3".
The Cree are very big people. And the thing is when they get to eat what they're supposed to eat, the problem is so many of them eat junk now.
Edouard Beaupre, 1881 to 1904, the Willow Bunch Giant, was a Canadian circus strongman who reached a verified height of 8 feet 3 inches due to pituitary gigantism. Renowned for his immense strength, including lifting full-grown horses, the gentle, multilingual giant toured with the Barnum and Bailey Circus to support his large family. Tragically, the physical toll of his condition led to his death from a pulmonary hemorrhage at just 23 years old during the St. Louis World's Fair. Following decades of post-mortem museum exploitation, his family finally reclaimed his remains in 1990 to give him a dignified burial in his Saskatchewan hometown.
Right, because they grow up on the
pounds maybe, or 367. Sorry,
they
8
grow
foot
up,
2.5, 367 pounds, age 33. Whoa.
Yeah, I forget the name of these brothers, but there's a bunch of them. Yeah, there's some weird genetics out there.
If you've ever felt that standard human potential is capped, the stories we discuss today prove that reality is far stranger than fiction. From military encounters deep in the valleys of Kandahar to hidden genetic giants in the remote north, the world is full of anomalies waiting to be understood. To truly get the value out of what you just watched, here are 3 actionable takeaways to keep in mind. First, question the boundary between urban legends and documented reality. Mythologies like the Kandahar giant often obscure fascinating biological truths, like extreme pituitary gigantism seen in figures like Edouard Beaupré. Always look past the sensationalized headlines to find the real scientific or historical context. Second, understand the impact of isolation and genetics. Distinct populations living in remote geographical areas often retain unique physical traits due to genetics and localized nutrition. Human diversity is far broader than what official record books or Main Street media typically showcase. Third, never rely on perception alone. Even trained operatives using precision optics find it challenging to visually estimate scale without direct reference points. Critical thinking requires cross-referencing eyewitness stories with historical, medical, and biological data. If this deep dive expanded your perspective on what exists in the quiet corners of our planet, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. We bring you the most compelling breakdowns of high-stakes stories, military accounts, and unexplained phenomena every week. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on these sightings. Do you believe these are unrecorded genetic giants or exaggerated military tales? Let's keep the conversation going in the comments.
So we only briefly touched on this Kandahar giant story, but were you ever in Kandahar?
Yeah, that's down in the south of
How
Afghanistan.
remote is it?
I mean, there's a large city there, town city. I don't know the difference between the two. It's relatively built up. As far as southern Afghanistan, it's going to be, you got Kabul up north, Kandahar is a little bit down south. Kabul in the north, you're going to start looking at the exterior range of the Hindu Kush. Kandahar still has some topography, but you're looking at more of like a high desert terrain.
And so there's caves and things along those lines? This is the idea that this thing lived in a cave.
Yeah. I mean, so, yeah, there is topography that is there for sure. Possible? I don't know.
Well, the reason why people entertain this idea of giants at all is a lot of it's biblical. It's like stories from the Bible. And then also stories from ancient civilizations that talked about red-haired giants, which is the weird thing about this thing, had red hair. Like the Native Americans had tales of red-haired giants that they fought off. Like, there's a lot of people that believe that all these stories from antiquity about giants are all referring to an actual different race of humans. Like we are one race of humans, that's the Homo sapien that survived, but then there's also races of humans that didn't survive, like the Hobbit people from the island of Flores, that they found out there was a branch of the human species that was like 3 feet tall, covered in hair, little tiny heads. Weird, but had tools and had weapons. And
I think some of that stuff's real. I think sometimes, though, the stories, they're intentionally nesting a greater message through the vehicle of that story. So whether it's like accurate or not, it's more about the story that they are telling. And I'm not saying like the Kandahar giant has some story associated with it, but some of the older, like the civilizations and the stories that they tell, I think it's just a vehicle that they can nest something in there to create deeper thought, if that makes sense. It's what I see you guys doing as comedians. I've talked about this recently. It is interesting to me, and I never paid attention to it, but I know he's a good friend of yours, Dave Chappelle. I watched his last special. The ability for comedians to nest inside of your set pretty impactful and powerful, like societal conversations and ideas, and get people to laugh about it. But even when they're done laughing about it, they're going to be thinking about it when they're driving home. It's just the vehicle to get people thinking about stuff.
Well, in terms of comedy, I agree, and Dave is one of the best of all time, if not the best at doing that. But what kind of a nesting would you... Well, you're talking about giants.
It depends on the morals and ethos of that society. If they want to be a warrior society, you have to have something that you're constantly fighting or protecting yourself against. whether that's real or you're nesting the morality of your society in that story, both could achieve the same end state.
If there really was a giant and they really did kill this thing and then brought it back secretly, like what would be the purpose of that? Why wouldn't they? That's where I go. Like, what would be the purpose of hiding the fact that this thing existed? I don't see why the government would hide the discovery of a giant. Like, what?
Yeah.
What military reason? What national security reason would you have for hiding the thing that this thing existed?
At some level of objective skepticism and criticism, or looking into these stories, you get to that point of like, who's benefiting from this and why?
Yeah.
Why would anybody actually go out of their way to put this much effort into obscure something like that?
Yeah. That's how I feel about giants.
If you found this breakdown of the Kandahar giant fascinating, it reveals a powerful truth about human nature. We are hardwired to love extraordinary stories. But as Joe and Andy pointed out, the real skill isn't just listening to wild tales, it's learning how to separate captivating myth from grounded reality. When you encounter shocking claims, conspiracy theories, or sensational news, try applying this simple 3-step critical filter before sharing or believing it. First, ask who benefits. Always question who gains attention, influence, or money from spreading a specific story. If there is no clear logical reason for a massive cover-up, skepticism should be your default setting. Second, look for tangible physical evidence. Fascinating folklore exists in almost every culture, from red-haired giants to mythical beasts. However, myth requires faith, while history requires verifiable fossils, artifacts, and cross-examined data. Third, identify the hidden lesson. As Andy highlighted with Dave Chappelle's comedy, powerful stories are often just vehicles built to deliver deeper messages about societal morals, fear, or unity. Ask yourself what core message the story is actually trying to teach. By sharpening this mental tool, you protect yourself from misinformation while still appreciating the rich storytelling traditions of human culture. Which unexplained mystery should we dissect under the lens of critical thinking next? Drop your top pick in the comments below, hit that like button if you learned something new today, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our next deep dive.